And eventually, it became a kind of hallmark of Marxist thinking about capitalism and about other systems, that he began to realize that not only was he interested in the organization of labor, but that other people who had studied economics weren't interested in it, hadn't studied. Let me again give you a metaphor. Suppose somebody was trying to study your family, and they used sociology, and they used biology and anatomy and all different sciences to try to understand your family. And then along comes a man or a woman who says, wait a minute, there's something seriously missing. I mean, all these studies have learned things that are useful, but I immediately noticed there's something missing. And my name, just to play with it, my name is Sigmund Freud. And I have in my mind that in every one of our minds, there is a conscious part, that's what we're aware of, what we're aware of saying, thinking, and doing. But there's another part, a part that is unconscious, a part where we have sequestered off, put into a part of our minds that isn't available to us most of the time. Things we have experienced that are frightening to us. Something we said when we were a little kid, and we saw the frown on our mother's face, and we realized that's not a good thing to say, that's not a good thing to do. And so we wanted to please our mother, and so without knowing what we were doing because we were little, we put it in another part of our mind, kind of pushed it out of our daily consciousness. But it turns out, Freud argued, that every human being has an unconscious, and periodically that unconscious erupts into your conscious life. He gave examples. A slip of the tongue, when something comes out of your mouth that you didn't mean to say, but that's your unconscious talking. Dreams, another time when your unconscious can become semi-aware for you. Well, think of Marx like this. He's like Freud. What he brings to the analysis is not the new realm of life called the unconscious, called psychology, something which nowadays we all take for granted. You have to use psychology to understand the family, and we would think of ourselves as woefully inadequate if we excluded that or knew nothing about that. Well, Marx is saying to us, and I as a Marxist am saying to you, it is equally bizarre 150 years after Marx shows the importance of how labor is organized in shaping any society, that when you analyze capitalism today, or 50 years ago, or last month, most of the mainstream analysis does not worry about, look at, think about, or apply Marx's research on, and that of many Marxists since, the importance of the organization of labor in shaping how an economy works. Well, let me explain further. Marx wasn't interested when I say organization of labor. He wasn't interested in, the carpenter works with a hammer and the barber works with scissors. It's not that. He had a very particular idea of that part of labor that economists systematically ignored, at least all of those before he writes, all of those before, say, the 1850s. And the organization of labor he has in mind, this tool he's going to develop to analyze capitalism, he gives a very interesting name to: class. That is, he uses the word class to describe, to depict, to identify a particular organization of labor. And before I explain it to you, let me remind you that this is Marx's new and different concept of class. Because of course the word class, which comes from the verb to classify, to take a bunch of things and break them into little groups, to classify. For example, I could classify people in a room, those who are tall and those who are short, those who are fat, those who are thin. Those are classifications. The class of the fat, the class of the thin. Well, long ago, long before Marx, there were people who thought it might be interesting to classify people in a community between those who had a lot of wealth and those who had nothing, rich and poor, between those who wielded a lot of authority and power and those who didn't have any power. Those would be classes of rich and poor, classes of powerful and powerless. Those are interesting classifications. They're not what Marx had in mind. They're not the tool that is the central apparatus of Marx's theory. No, Marx had a different concept of class, and it refers to an organization of labor. And I'm now going to take you through that, and now we are really getting into the core concepts of Marx's distinctive way of analyzing capitalism. It begins with a basic idea, perhaps the most basic idea in all of Marx's analytical work. It goes like this. In every community of human beings, a household, a tribe, a clan, a village, a nation, no matter how big or small, in every reproducing community, one that lasts through time, you will find, Marx says, that some people in the community do work. And by this he means they apply their brains and their muscles to materials given by nature, a sheep, a tree, a flower, a plant. They transform the natural material into something useful for human consumption. They convert a tree into a chair, a sheep's wool into a shirt, an electronic system into a software program, whatever. And Marx says in every community, however, we need to notice that not all of the people in it are doing work. That is, some are working and some are not. And what's interesting, he says, is that it is always true that those who do the work produce an output of goods and services, shirts, chairs, software programs, whatever, that is larger than the quantity of those goods and services these workers themselves consume. In other words, if they're making food, they make more than they themselves eat. If they're making clothing, they make more than they themselves wear, and so forth. And now Marx says the other half of this story is that in every community there are people who do not work, who do not, in the sense I have been using it, apply their brains and muscles to producing the basic goods and services of this society. But they live, these non-workers, because the extra produced by those who work is distributed to them. Let me give you the simplest examples. Most human communities, not all, but most human communities do not expect small children to work. 1 year old, 2 years old, they don't work. But yet they are fed and clothed and housed. The only way a human being can consume, if he or she does not help to produce, is if somebody else is producing more than they get to keep and consume. That's the only way this can happen. Likewise, in many communities, old people, people determined to be beyond a certain age, are retired from work. They are allowed to continue to eat and wear outfits and keep warm and so forth. So they again have to be sustained by getting a distribution of whatever is left over from what the workers produce that they themselves don't consume. And now there are others. Sick people would be another one. Maybe people who are told, you don't have to produce goods and services, we want you to amuse us while we work. You don't make shirts and shoes and tables. You sing to those people who make shirts and suits and tables. Well, here's another one. We're afraid that people from over the hill will come and take our stuff. So we're going to have 3 or 4 people who stand around all day with a big stick to ward off those other people. Do they help produce the goods and services we all consume? Nope. And they have to be sustained. So Marx begins to develop an analysis, and it goes like this. Every human society generates a surplus. All that idea means is that the subpopulation, the portion of the population that works, always produces more than it itself consumes. And that more, that extra output beyond what the workers themselves get, that's what the word surplus means. That's what it designates. So in every society, Marx says,